On an ordinary night in Minneapolis, a single act, a gang member accused of stealing a rifle from an FBI vehicle ignited a rapid chain reaction. Suddenly, protests against federal immigration raids turned into scenes of street violence, incendiary rhetoric from elected leaders calling for dismantling law enforcement, and federal agents surged into the city as the National Guard rolled out. But what really triggered this explosive escalation? And how deep does this crisis go? Raul Gutierrez, a name now stamped across federal affidavits, entered the spotlight when he was charged with stealing an M16A1 rifle and body armor from an FBI vehicle during the height of Minneapolis unrest. According to the charging documents, Gutierrez, identified as a convicted felon and alleged member of the Latin Kings, targeted the vehicle after an ICE agent fatally shot Renee Good on January 7, 2026. Within hours, the theft was no longer rumor. It was detailed in a sworn statement with surveillance footage, facial tattoo identification, and a prior record including burglary and assault. Federal prosecutors wasted no time. Gutierrez was booked on federal counts of firearm possession by a felon and theft of government property, each carrying the threat of years behind bars. The Gutierrez arrest was not an isolated blip. That same week, federal agents logged a dozen more arrests tied to assaults on officers during the protests. Incident reports described a pattern: bricks hurled at marked vehicles, officers forced to draw weapons as crowds battered their cars, and government-issued gear disappearing into the night. One affidavit recounted how Gutierrez pried open the FBI vehicle trunk, while a crowd pressed in, grabbed the rifle, and escaped into the chaos. The details, confirmed by the U.S. Attorney's Office, painted a picture of calculated aggression rather than spontaneous anger. Prosecutors emphasized that these acts crossed a legal threshold. Stealing a rifle from federal custody in the middle of civil unrest is not just another protest. It is a federal crime with national security implications. The Department of Homeland Security responded with public statements promising prosecution to the fullest extent of the law, and the FBI posted a $100,000 reward for information on additional thefts and vandalism. As these incidents stacked up in court dockets and police logs, the line between protest and organized resistance grew sharper. 12 protesters now face assault charges for attacking federal officers, charges that, according to the affidavits, stemmed from coordinated actions rather than random violence. The pattern was clear. In the span of a few nights, Minneapolis shifted from demonstrations to a series of targeted attacks, weapon thefts, and direct confrontations with federal agents. Each new arrest added weight to the federal case that what unfolded on the streets had moved beyond civil disobedience and into territory federal law treats as insurrection. Ilhan Omar's voice carried across Minneapolis as crowds gathered in the wake of Operation Metro Surge. From the steps of the Urban League headquarters to a packed press conference at Carmel Mall, Omar called enforcement by Immigration and Customs Enforcement a campaign of terror, accusing federal agents of unleashing violence on neighborhoods and demanding accountability for the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Her statements, echoed by Ayanna Pressley at her side, rejected the idea of reform. Instead, they called for the abolition of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the defeat of a $28 billion Department of Homeland Security funding bill, framing the operation as an attack on democracy and immigrant families. Omar's words landed in a city already tense from nightly raids and mass detentions. She described masked federal agents as kidnappers, warning that without community resistance, neighbors would disappear into unmarked vans. Pressley urged Congress to strip Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents of qualified immunity, insisting that those responsible for violence could not walk away freely. At the same time, business owners in the Somali district reported losses topping $30 million a month, blaming federal patrols for driving away customers and sowing fear among families. The rhetoric did not remain contained to podiums and press releases. As protests swelled in the streets, the Department of Homeland Security announced the expansion of Operation Metro Surge, confirming that 3,000 federal agents now operated in the Twin Cities. Department of Homeland Security memos cited the need for a show of force to restore order, with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Protection, and Homeland Security investigations working in tandem. The operation's scale became the largest of its kind in Minnesota history, with hundreds of arrests, and an unmistakable federal presence in neighborhoods from Powderhorn Park to Lake Street. The growing federal footprint did not go unnoticed by Minnesota's leaders. Governor Walz and Mayor Frey faced mounting pressure as the White House threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act if local officials failed to contain unrest. While the National Guard remained on standby, the message was clear. The federal government would not tolerate what it described as organized resistance. In this climate, every statement from the city's most prominent officials was scrutinized for signs of encouragement or defiance. The boundaries between political speech and actionable resistance blurred, raising questions about who was driving the escalation and who would be held responsible as the crisis deepened. Federal attention quickly turned from the streets to the offices of Minnesota's top officials. Reports leaked from the Department of Justice confirmed that both Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey were under criminal investigation, accused of obstructing federal law enforcement during Operation Metro Surge. Prosecutors cited evidence suggesting that local leaders coordinated efforts to hinder Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Department of Homeland Security, bringing the possibility of conspiracy charges into play. The legal spotlight intensified as investigators followed the money. At the center of the inquiry stood the Feeding Our Future scandal, $250 million in fraud, that had already led to more than 70 convictions by 2024. Prosecutors traced the scheme through fake daycares, shell nonprofits, and ghost meal programs, all siphoning federal funds intended for children's nutrition. Congressional oversight transcripts from 2023 and 2024 featured whistleblowers who described a pattern of state inaction. One witness told lawmakers that officials knew and did nothing as millions vanished. While no transcript captured the words absolutely or 100% when witnesses were pressed on intentional oversight, the implication was clear in the record. Fraud had been flagged, but the machinery kept running. Governor Walz's administration took office after the original fraud warnings, but the shadow of Feeding Our Future stretched into the current unrest. The Department of Justice probe sought to determine whether political pressure or negligence allowed the fraud to flourish, and whether state and city leaders now facing federal scrutiny had looked the other way for political gain. Investigators linked the flow of federal dollars to the power structures shaping the response on Minneapolis streets, framing the unrest not just as protest but as fallout from years of unchecked financial abuse. Headlines split the city in two. On January 15, 2026, Fox News led with the headline, "Federal Agents Under Siege in Minneapolis. Armed Gang Member Steals FBI Rifle Amid ICE Violence," while CNN countered the same day with the headline, "Trump's ICE Surge Sparks Unrest. Critics decry overreach after civilian deaths." The language was not just loaded, it set the boundaries for what counted as protest and what crossed the line into federal crime. Federal prosecutors did not rely on headlines. Their charging documents referenced the Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 231 and Section 2383, statutes that separate civil disorder from insurrection and rebellion. The test is not about anger in the streets, it is about intent and organized action. The Gutierrez Affidavit, entered into the record on January 16, 2026, described not just the theft of an M16A1 rifle and body armor, but the context. A crowd provided cover, a known gang member acted with purpose, and there was evidence of prior coordination. The document said the subject was observed communicating by phone with unidentified individuals before approaching the vehicle, and the crowd dispersed in tandem as the trunk was breached. Prosecutors also referenced RICO predicates, racketeering activity under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1961, when describing the pattern of assaults and thefts. 12 protesters now face charges for coordinated attacks on federal officers, each incident logged with timestamps, locations, and matching witness statements. The legal threshold for conspiracy or insurrection is not public outrage. It is a pattern of deliberate, collective action to impede federal law. In the eyes of the law, the evidence now on the table is enough to move from protest to prosecution. Today, the lines between protest, rhetoric, and federal response blur more than ever. As political divisions deepen, the consequences extend far beyond Minneapolis. What happens next will define not just law and order, but the boundaries of dissent in America. The stakes have never been clearer or higher.